Future Design Podcast.
This is Takatoshi Shibayama, and you're listening to the Future Design Podcast. Today, I've got Siddharth Sthalekar from Sacred Capital. He gives us the insight on transitioning from the economy of monetary capital to reputational capital. Yeah,
Thanks
man.
for having me here.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So, I always wanted to ask you this, and probably asked you before, but so China's doing this social responsibility scoring thing, right? So, yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, that to me is like totally fucking Orwellian kind of stuff, right? So, and it's not like they give you anything if you do something good, right? It's more like a negative scoring system where they say, if you do this, then you can't travel. If you do this, no access to, I don't know, entertainment, whatever it is, yes, people will probably be able to act better, have better manners, but then there's no incentive to be even better than that, right? So you just do the bare minimum possible to be like, fit into society, right? And get by, but, you're not going to do anything more than that.
Yeah. Wow, you really got right into it.
Fuck yeah.
Let's go straight into China. I think it's an interesting conversation. And we try to approach these conversations with, we live in a world where people are going to do a bunch of things anyway. And so we try not to label it as, oh my God, that is just, totally not kosher or authoritarian. Because I think we now live in a world, I kind of like to call it distributed reality. So each, community or country or region is just going to pick up what they'd like to, do on the basis of their own value systems, on the basis of their own culture. And that's a sharp contrast to the last 30 or 40 years where we all kind of abided by this liberal democracy and capital free markets kind of story. So I think you have to approach these kinds of conversations with, meet people where they're at.
Wait, what's that distributed reality? What does that mean?
Well, I think for the last 20, 30, 40 years, the story or the formula for success was free markets governed by some kind of democracy.
Yeah.
In some cases it was liberal democracy, like I would say more pure democracy. In some cases it was, kind of like a hybrid democracy. And your success was on the basis of how well you enforce these two systems. But the last couple of years, we're kind of seeing each region pull away in its own direction, and that's probably because we don't have this one pool of global trade that everyone feels like they need to be part of. So, in a way,
there wasn't any trickle down effect, right? Basically,
yeah. Oh, I mean, I think there might have been some amount because you look at stories like regions like India and people like me are in probably the 10 or 15% that have benefited from this, the last 15 years of free markets. And so there was definitely benefit. But I think with post-2008, in a world where, democracies are being threatened by peer-to-peer technologies, economics are being threatened by, new technologies like crypto and blockchain, some of it has been dismantled. And governments and regions are starting to figure out their own stories. So that kind of means each region is picking up their own truth or their own culture and saying, this is, what works for us. And that's what we're going to adhere to. So in China, there's firm belief in the fact that the state must have power. And maybe that's what works well in a country of 1 billion people. You're seeing similar, explorations in Russia, in India, in Scandinavia. I think they believe they're strongly, socialist.
Yeah.
So the state must provide for its citizens in a certain way. America's, I think, having that debate right now.
Yeah.
And so I fundamentally feel like we're in this place where you can't have that old dialogue like, that's authoritarian, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Well, no one's listening to you. And I think we've kind of realized that. So you kind of have to approach conversations and meet people where they are. That being said, governments around the world are facing the same problem. And I think the problem is they're increasingly exposed to distributed technologies, peer-to-peer technologies, where content is floating around in this vacuum, where no one's held responsible for what they're saying. People appropriated and orchestrate attacks on democracy or on governments with it. Governments are faced with an increasing flow of capital through organizations, companies, people around the world, either through blockchain or just through traditional capital flows. And there's very little accountability anymore. Like, I think people have figured out a way in which to play, the global regulation system. And so I hear the pain. Like, there's a lot of governments that don't know how to deal with this. And so as a result of it, you see governments going through this authoritarian transformation where they're just like, we're going to pass these really strict, regulations which come down hard on anyone, who's
I mean, there's always a value in information asymmetry, right? And you can control people better if you own the information. And now we're living in a world with internet where, information's, uncensored. Well, depends on how you say
or even, I'd say even if governments wanted to censor some of this content, it's literally impossible, right? Like today, you can go onto any platform, create an account, pretend to be someone, spout a bunch of content. And so you have to have, you've seen governments coming down really harshly on these rules. And as a result of it, we're seeing, a world where it's really, really difficult to start creating value when you've got such weird, lopsided regulations. And so this came up in one of our conversations with one of the governments. I'm not going to say, but we've been chatting with a few Asian governments. And there was this, almost like this catchphrase. Like, I think some of this is going to start going viral in a few months. Like, we need to move from regulations to reputation.
Right.
And in the old story, you had free markets which were governed by regulations, and so that balance really created this healthy environment where capitalism worked, where businesses were accountable, and they were directed to create value. So it was like this balance. It was like this yin and yang, like and in this new world where you've got crypto floating around, anyone can print a bunch of coins, and from one corner of the world raise a bunch of money. It's really hard to expect the old system of regulations to balance that,
right?
Because you're talking about, it's almost like an army of elephants trying to battle an army of cockroaches or roaches, right? Like it's just weird and lopsided. And so I think more and more governments are starting to think about moving from regulations to reputation. Now that's a really polarizing conversation, because there's a bunch of people who look at that and say, oh my God, that's just like super dystopian, and that's not what we mean at all. And so at Sacred Capital, we've been talking about, well, what is the future experience of wealth, or what are future wealth systems going to look like? In this peer-to-peer world, we think peer-to-peer technologies are going to be balanced by reputation. And what we're saying is, you don't build reputation to monitor people. Like, that's rarely ever the point. Like, if you look in the past, you'll see most successful economic systems or phases of value creation were never, in a space of mistrust.
Right.
But you look at reputation as you try to build reputation systems almost as an economy of sorts. And I can talk about that more, like what that even means.
Yeah. Please do.
And so what we're saying is, blockchains, distributed ledgers are taking everything more distributed. Like, we're starting to live in distributed networks. And what you need to do is build reputation as an economy. So for building something as an economy, you need to build it in an agent-centric way. 50 years ago, more and more countries started picking up this concept of money and economic systems, and let's say 70 years ago, 100 years ago. But what's really important is, when a nation created money, they backed it up with democratic process. So when you had money in your bank account, that money couldn't be taken away from you without democratic process, right? You didn't wake up one day and found the money was gone.
Right.
If there was regulations around it. And so same way with reputation.
But that's like recent history, right? I mean, like in the time
Probably
of
the
the
last
monarchs.
70 years. Yeah. So I'm talking about the last 70 to 100 years.
Yeah.
And you could argue and say the last 70 to 100 years have been a phenomenal success. Of course, now we're criticizing a lot of it, and we find that it's limited. But you think about it, this concept of human rights, like you can go spend your money anywhere. Like, that was absurd. Like, wow, you actually, like, who gave you that agency? Like, I think it was democratic process that gave you agency. And so it was this fundamental belief that if Taka is given agency of his money, he'll spend it or invest it or do something with it in a way which will be beneficial for the society as a whole. And so in the same way, what we're building is a reputation system where reputation isn't driven top down. Like, this isn't Sacred Capital's reputation and, cash is of 90 out of 100 and Taka's an 80 out of 100. Like, I think that's really dystopian.
Right.
In fact, reputation works really well when it's bottom up, when it's diverse. So when I introduce Taka to a friend of mine, I'm not going to say, hey, meet Taka, he's a 75 on 100. Like, that's just ridiculous. Right. I'd say, hey, meet Taka, he's a great, he's an ex-banker, he's, a great thinker about systems, he runs the blockchain center, like, he's a very interesting guy, like, he loves coffee, he loves travel. Like, that's how you qualify people, right? And so bottom-up systems allow us to do it in that way. And so what we're designing is known as a reputation-based economy. And so there's 4 rules for building reputation as an economy. Some of this, very interestingly, goes back to the 1930s, 1940s, very interestingly around what Gandhi has designed in the past or spoken about. Back in the 30s and 40s, there was this whole conversation around local economies, and it's kind of sad that all of those conversations died, but it was then picked up by this guy called E.F. Schumacher. So for those who are listening, I'd recommend this book called Small is Beautiful, which talks about economics for distributed systems. And the crux is this, like, we can talk about this peer-to-peer world, like this distributed world where you and I from around the world can interact with each other. It means nothing unless there's an underlying social fabric that binds us together. Like, if I can't trust you, and I don't know who you are, it's almost irrelevant for us to try and transact with each other.
Well,
So,
but you have things like Airbnb and Uber, where you don't know the drivers, you don't know the property owners.
And in that case, you had a large institution which provided that fabric. Like, if there wasn't an Uber and just a smart contract telling me to go meet this driver, and that driver could be, could just ghost after this interaction, I'd feel kind of unsafe.
Right.
Or I'd spin that around and say, Airbnb and Uber at best have, or Uber has at best, kind of sparked off interactions which are not very intimate. Like, I'm not going to, he's just my driver.
Right.
And so, in any case, like, some of what distributed economics speaks about is how do you build reputation as an economy. And so there's 4 rules, like there's 4 fundamental tenets for it. Rule number 1 is reputation is linked with identity. So if Taka's, loves coffee, or he's a coffee connoisseur, he can't transfer that to Sid. Like, that makes no sense. Like, so it's linked to identities. With what we say, it's endogenous. Whereas with money, if you have 5 coins, you can send me the 5 coins. It's not linked with you. Rule number 2 is reputation is contextual. So if you're a great coffee drinker, you could recommend to me great places to grab a cup of coffee. It would not make sense for you to say, Sid, I'm a coffee connoisseur, and here's what movies you should watch this weekend. Like, that's just absurd.
But even in that coffee world, I could be a Ethiopian coffee bean lover. You could be like Colombian that you like more acidic stuff. I mean,
there's nuances to it. And so that takes us to point number 3. Reputation is relative. And so I might think your coffee tastes are fantastic, whereas Cash might think they're just, he doesn't like them. Maybe he prefers like the strange Ethiopian, blend that nobody else likes. So he's into some, different kind of coffee. And so reputation gets dystopian when it's absolute. And what do I mean by that? Like, with the material economy, if Taka has a house, there's an absolute answer to it, right? Like, there's one state. Whereas, is Taka a good coffee connoisseur? Well, that's kind of relative. Like, the question is who says so? Like, if Cash says you're a great coffee connoisseur, and I think Cash's tastes are great, like, then I'd kind of. But if there's someone I don't regard at all as a good coffee connoisseur, and they're saying Taka is great, I probably won't. That doesn't match up. So it's relative. So it's dystopian, I would say, or also a little silly to say Taka's a great citizen. Like, that's just an absolute answer. or just before this, we were talking about films, and we were talking about Quentin Tarantino films, and I think it's kind of silly to have IMDb rating 8.5 for XYZ film.
Yeah.
Like, we all know the limitations of that. Like, we know it doesn't mean too much beyond a point, because we all have different tastes.
Yeah, and you put a
in
number
things.
on that, then it becomes very non-contextual, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that becomes absolute.
Yeah. And that's the problem with the traditional internet. We've just had this absolutism.
Yeah.
So it sits in, IMDb servers,
Yeah.
it sits in TripAdvisor servers, it sits in, Yelp servers.
Yeah.
Whereas reputation really thrives when there's relativity. So my rating for Quentin Tarantino film, what I see should be a function of who I trust. So I might see Quentin Tarantino films as an 8.5, whereas Cash, who's got a completely different set of tastes, might see it as a 6.4.
Yeah.
And that's important. So that's rule number 3. It's relative. And rule number 4, and what we think is really exciting about it, is it's a non-zero-sum economy. So when you stake your reputation, when you say, Sid, go to these coffee shops, you're not spending your reputation, but you stake it.
Right.
Whereas with money, it's zero-sum. So if you give me, if you have 5 pencils, you give me 3, you now have 2 left.
Yeah.
But with coffee, if you're 5-star rated and you say, Sid, go to these coffee shops, I think it's great, your rating rises.
So does that staking mean I'll stake my 5-star rating that I have as a coffee aficionado, and then say, okay, as a 5-star dude, I say this coffee shop is great, and then you go and say, no, actually, I don't think that was good.
Yeah.
Does that mean that my 5-star is going to go away, and then it's going to be like, I don't know, 3?
Yeah. So these are rules that. So where does all of this fit in? When you build reputation as an economy, you want to give each application, each cooperative, each little context, each little network, the ability to create its own context. So maybe one kind of app says, hey, we create coffee ratings on the basis of number of upvotes that you get. Maybe someone else thinks upvotes are kind of silly, like we need something more tangible. Like maybe it's the workshops, number of workshops that you conduct or whatever. And so each context defines that. And so, of course, if I'm, as part of this little app or community, I don't like your recommendations, I'm going to downvote them. And what's really cool, and what blockchains, distributed ledgers are really allowing, is for that to be stored in my end. Like as opposed to, with the internet, you just had one server that everyone subscribed to and everyone viewed to. So that was what we called a data-centric paradigm.
Right.
And now moving to what's known as an agent-centric paradigm. So when I say Taka's coffee choices are shit, that downvote sits in my neighborhood. And so people who follow my neighborhood and my ledgers are going to start seeing that as a downgrade.
I see. So you have your own data source, or like a
ledger.
Yeah. And then everybody gets to see that.
Yep.
And then everybody else you can look at everybody else's.
Yeah. So platforms like Holochain and are creating this new paradigm that's known as agent-centric approaches.
Okay.
And when you think about it, that's kind of how life works. Like if I think you're a stupid person, there's no central record in the sky that it goes and sits on. Certain religions would like us to believe that that's the way the world works, but
then if you think I'm fucking stupid, then that gets recorded permanently on your ledger.
On my ledger,
Even though right now in this world, if you die, then you thinking of me as stupid, disappears. My reputation as a stupid asshole remains in that ledger. Isn't that kind of like a little bit, I don't know. For me, I don't want that, right?
Well, yes and no. Like in reality, my opinions can also be passed on as my legacy, right?
Sure.
Like if I have a group of friends, I'll go and speak about them, speak about you to them, and that passes on outside of me.
Sure.
So what you just brought up has both positive and negative qualities. Negative quality is stuff just, can be tracked and recorded till eternity. And I think, again, we have to approach this with this is the nature of the technology, irrespective of, what we can do about it. And so applications will need to think about things like legacy. So we're running something called Reputation Labs, which helps apps entrepreneurs design reputation. So one of the conversations we have with them is, well, is your coffee reputation for life? Like, let's say, 20 years ago, Taka was brilliant with coffee. Does that mean he maintains that reputation? Like, say he hasn't recommended anything for 20 years. Does he still continue to hold that reputation? Probably not, right? Like, there's some amount of perishability or decay or what we call legacy.
Or it could get better as well.
And so, everything comes down to that context. And so the app will have to decide, well, at some point, that just kind of fades away. And they'd want to do it because it makes people derive more meaning from that reputation. Like, if an app was stupid enough to say, Taka's a 5-star coffee aficionado today, and he's going to be so for life. Like, people just kind of lose, they won't derive meaning out of it. But a well-designed reputation will design that legacy into it. And so I don't think what you're saying is at ends with good behavior, like good use cases. Like, if you want people to derive meaning out of it, like, model it closer to reality. And I think, that leads to better use cases of reputation.
Right. But now we're just talking about like personal tastes, right? Like movies, coffees, you mentioned those. But like, what about like, social, actions, right? So, I'm jaywalking or, I just checked out a girl on the street. It could be any of those kind of normal stuff that you do on the road, and then, I don't know, maybe in the future, smart cities, there's cameras everywhere, and then checking my moves, or it's probably happening anyway, checking my moves, and then, there's, I don't know, like maybe there's a social scoring on what I do, in my free time, just walking around the street, and then there's some kind of, reputation being kind of accumulated somewhere, is that some kind of thing that you think about?
Oh, we think about it a lot. We've had like a ton of debates about it. And I think some of this stems from our experience with reputation in the past. So reputation isn't something new. It's been part of, our lives for a while. Like I said, regulations were a kind of reputation, right? Like the fact that you went to some Ivy League school, the fact that you don't have a criminal record, the fact that you haven't defaulted on loans in the past. They're all records. The fact that you're a citizen of some country, like, this is reputation.
Yeah.
The issue is this reputation is held and controlled by very monolithic binary institutions. And so it's kind of like Taka's this fluid mask, and you're a complex human being, right? Like, there's so many layers to you, but it's being mapped on this super one-dimensional monolithic wall, which probably takes like really awkward snapshots of you, and that's our fear. Like, that's the concern.
I think the concern is more like now that HR managers are now not just looking at your CV, they're looking at your LinkedIn, your social media, and they're analyzing all that data and then trying to craft you as how you are socially as well, right? Where or even your credit scores, I hear that now they're trying to figure out how you are socially, and then how you can pay back or your
I'll come to this. I'll come to this. So the first shift is, as opposed to monolithic fabric, as opposed to monolithic institutions, we're trying to map reputation to almost like this mosaic. So, is Taka punctual? There's no one absolute answer to that. Yes, he is punctual, or he's like 75% punctual. It's, well, what context? Like, in the context of his friends, maybe he's not. In the context of Singapore, maybe he is. Like, maybe Singapore thinks punctuality is binary. Maybe Tokyo thinks punctuality is a spectrum. And so if you're 30 seconds late, it means you're not really late. It's kind of okay. So when I ask the question, is Taka punctual, there's 50,000 answers to it. Right? And I think that's a healthy way to quantify everything. So it falls onto a very mosaic fabric. And the second piece, and I think this is super critical, you need an agent-centric approach towards reputation. And that's why doing this with blockchains, distributed ledgers, is so critical. Because for the first time, reputation can be owned by the individual, and the capacity to stake it is held by the individual. So I'll give you an example. Like,
Yeah.
let's say there's let's say there's a new blogging site that's been created, and we're starting to see this already with speaking with applications that are creating these kinds of platforms. And the application that's creating this blogging platform, their concern might be, we don't want bots,
Yeah.
right? And so what they might do is, say, hey, let's import reputations from 15 or 20 other applications, which allow a user to prove that they're not bots. So,
Okay.
for example, if you're in another chat app and you've had healthy conversations with a bunch of people,
Yeah.
it kind of shows you're not a bot. And so
Right.
if that not a bot reputation is ported into this blogging platform, you benefit from day one. You don't have to run through hurdles. So
Yeah.
much more can be opened up to you. Like you have the freedom to type and chat and voice yourself. So when you sign up to the blogging application, you'll have that question posed to you. Would you like to import reputations from these 3 communities into ours? And the question lies with you to think about, are they related?
Yeah.
Is this the kind of reputation I want to port into here? And if you say yes, you receive the benefits of it.
Right.
But if you think, no, like, I'd like to keep that part of me separate, that agency lies with you.
Okay.
Now, of course, the trade-off is, well, then you're going to have to prove that you're not a bot on this platform.
Or you
Which
could
is
just,
okay.
or you're
Or there's-
or you're kind of manipulating yourself, right? You're just taking the good. Maybe you just say, okay, I'm terrible at these 5 things.
Yeah.
Reputation is terrible.
Yeah.
But these 3 things I'm good, so I'm just going to import that. Can
yeah,
you do that?
Yeah. So you will see situations of that, but in doing so, you still kind of lose, right? Because what the new app is saying is, hey, why don't you import these, maybe the 10 reputations? And you're like, no, I'm just going to import 5. You'll only receive benefits of 5. It's kind of like, again, with reality, right? Like, let's say I'm meeting you for the first time.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be like, I know Cash, I know Mel, I know Bill. And you might be like, hey, do you know John? And maybe I've had like bad experiences with John. I'm like, no, I don't know John.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying in that case is, hey, just go by the context of these 3 conversations.
Right.
And so I'm not going to receive the benefit of all of these other conversations. Like maybe if I did know John and have a great conversation with him, I would actually, be able to show so much more context.
Right.
Let's take a more tangible example. Let's take ride sharing, for example.
Yeah.
Let's say you have an app like Uber, and I'm a great driver on Uber. I have a fantastic safety record. I have, great hygiene ratings. I have great driving skill ratings.
Yeah.
There's a new app called Grab in town, which says, hey, if you're a driver in Uber, we'd love it if you import these, hygiene and punctuality and safety records from Uber and place them at stake in our reputation, in our application.
Okay.
Now, if you're a half decent guy, you're probably going to be like, yeah, that's fantastic. Like, I'm going to get all these benefits from here.
Yeah.
And that's because I've not been an idiot in the old application. But if you have been an idiot in Uber, you're going to lose out
Yeah.
because you're going to have to jump through so many more hurdles in this new app called Grab.
Right.
So the way it's important to frame it in the light of, when you port reputation, you have the benefit of showing more context. And so I like to think about it as, in these kinds of systems, positive behavior is rewarded and negative behavior actually has to jump through so many more hoops just to keep doing it. And if you think about it, a large number of users on the internet are decent people.
Okay. I mean,
Just hear me out.
all right.
I think my assumption is like a large number of people on the internet are actually decent people. And so people like you and me, why can't we be given, good entry permits to start, jumping through less hoops in order to enter into more intimate interactions? Like, I think if you and I were given the opportunity to not have, not have to jump through loops, I think we'd kind of take it.
Yeah.
And so there are a few people who might be on the fence, who make those hateful comments.
Yeah.
And you think about why they do it. It's because there is actually no feedback loop for that negative behavior.
Right.
Like if you post something on Instagram, in your comments, I could leave a really hateful, stupid comment and there's no repercussions.
Sure.
But, if I meet Dylan here in the room for the first time, if I make a stupid comment at him, I kind of know I have to live with that for the next 30 minutes.
Sure.
And so that's how reality works again.
I mean, I heard of this term called social cooling, where you try to conform yourself so that you meet the social, consensus, right?
Yeah.
And great example, Japan's like a country where it's all about social cooling. So everybody generally needs to be acting quite the same to create a harmonious society, right? And then, a lot of people go to Japan and say, oh, everybody's so polite, they're so nice, they take me around and the food's great and the service is great. And yes, of course, because that's what they're doing. They're doing social cooling, right? And then they get trashed and then they just, go berserk, right? I don't know if you've ever seen that before, but
I know. I'm
there's so
part
much
of an Asian culture as well. Like, like it fully flows through my culture as well. Like,
because there's a lot of people I've met who are Japanese like me that moved out of the country, and then the first thing I always ask them is like, how do you feel, living in Singapore? And they're like, oh yeah, and I feel so free because I don't have to, conform to society over there, and I could be who I want to be and say what I want to say. So that's what I worry about is like if the whole world needs to do social cooling, right? And they have to be a certain person so that you get a good reputation overall. Yes, it shows the whole, everybody else is like happy, right? About you because you're always cool with each other, right? But then you have this pent up kind of frustration in you because you can't act the way you really want to act, and then one mistake on social media and you say, oh yeah, this thing sucks, or like I don't agree to it. It could be small things like
let's take a more than like one user accuses you of misconduct in some case. Like it kind of drags you down, like it's so fragile, right? Yeah.
Or I can't even disagree with you. Like in Japan, nobody talks about politics because they think that if I confront you with an argument, that's already like my negative score, right? So nobody wants to talk about politics or anything that will introduce personal opinions or hard personal opinions into a discussion, right? So then that makes people think less, they want to express less, and then they just retreat into themselves, and I think it's very mentally unhealthy, and that's what I worry about, like this whole reputation thing for me. I mean, look, I'm totally all about having good reputation, right? I try to be a good social citizen, but where do you draw the line? Where can you actually be free, and then where do you have to be socially good? That's how do you draw that line? And we are so imperfect, right? And being imperfect is what makes us interesting. And if we're all the fucking same, doesn't that make us so fucking boring? That's what I worry about.
I think it's a super interesting point you bring up. And I'd actually like to qualify that with some of my experience as well. Like I've been born and brought up in the city of Mumbai, like 25 million people. Like I fundamentally subscribe more to social fabric than money. Like I'm a very community-oriented person. I've also lived through riots, so I've seen community, like the nasty side of communities. Like
what kind of
everyone's
riots?
all fine. Sorry?
What is
like
this
communal riots, like religion-based, people destroying each other. Like I've seen some of it, and so this isn't about people are nice and let's hold hands and kind of like embrace each other as communities. I think people can be like communities can be nasty. They can be extremely inward-looking. They can be extremely dark, and this isn't about the assumption that humans are inherently not evil. Like there can be, all kinds of sides to them. I think community or communal living has had its side effects because they've not had the benefit of what's known as a formal economic language. And what do I mean by that? Like money has had a formal economic language, right? Like if you have money in your bank account today, it can't be taken away without democratic process. If you want to transfer it, you have the agency to transfer it to anyone in the world, and then, for whatever reason. reputation hasn't had that benefit. As a result of it, it gets dominated by large institutions, traditional institutions. It has no fabric on which it can rely upon, so it's not resilient. And so you often see them devolve down into patriarchy. So that culture is dominated by a handful of people at the top. And that's a classical patriarchal system. And so,
Can you define that a little bit more? So like, So what do you mean by like large institution, like kind of owning that reputation?
Yeah. So I'm not sure how it would work in Japan, but for example, in India, you would have communities that would largely decide, or historically, it would be, you can't eat meat in this community.
Yeah.
And then you have all of these systems, where everyone's like, oh, we don't eat meat, but, you move out of the community and it's almost like a repression of sorts.
Right.
And the problem is this culture isn't restricted just to my eating habits.
Yeah.
It's all pervading. My economic well-being is part of this. My social strata is part of this. So who I marry, like what kind of social situations I can be part of. Can I be part of business ventures? Like it's all pervading.
Yeah.
And it's a very homogenous reputation. And I actually think that's dystopian. Like the aim here is not to articulate how good is Dhaka. Like we're not trying to classify you as good and like stagger everyone into this one ranking system,
Right.
which is what communities, which is what cultures has been in the past.
Right. You specifically specifying like caste systems in India? Or
I would
is it
say
something more?
No,
than
this
that?
is more communal. So, different parts of India, like every 50 or 100 kilometers, you have a new language, a new culture, a new
Yeah.
community, a new
Right.
system, a new, cuisine, like everything's different.
Yeah.
But yeah, the caste system also plays into some of
Right.
this. And so it's communal because, who I marry, and obviously I'm, not part of some of these systems, but I can see a large part of Indians, still who they marry, what they eat, where they socialize, access to capital, like everything's a function of how good, quote unquote, they are in the community.
Right.
And so I think that's dystopian because those are very homogenous definitions of culture. Like, and what we're trying to say is we're not coming up with a score of Dhaka's a 75 on 100. Like what we're trying to say is, look at Dhaka, there's, 50 different layers to him. And so maybe you want to be part of a vegan community, and maybe you want to be part of, of wellness or activity community. And even within wellness, there might be like 50,000 versions of it. And it's important that these quantifications sit on distributed ledgers. In the past, how good or bad I was largely a function of like people's memory, which is so vague and ridiculous. Like it's, like I said, social fabric still forms a big chunk of my head, but it's largely like when you dumb it down, like controlled by these 3 or 4 people.
Yeah.
And there's no way we can build an economy, build reliance on the basis of it, which is why, you see, when I ask you, if you want to build a future for yourself, we largely revert to money because that's the only formal economic language you have. So the effort here is to build a formal economic language for culture, for reputation, in a way which lets us truly rely upon it. And so the aspiration here is to actually create 50,000 answers to the question, is Dhaka punctual? Like each context will have its own. And so we think that goes to address some of these concerns. But I hear you. Like the word community is a scary word. Like it's not all about like it's
Well, I
not
guess,
about
but still,
being-
community understands you most, right? They might put some kind of pressure on you, but because you live in a community, everybody generally knows about you, and then this thing you can't transport it to a different country, right? So we're doing business on a global scale now, right? Or we're on the internet and everything's global. There's no borders. So when I get online and then I try to communicate with the person halfway around the world, nobody knows me there. How do I transport who I am more effectively than just say, hi, I'm Taka, right?
Yeah. So that brings us to the second bit about what we're building. The first part was Reputation Labs, which is helping entrepreneurs build reputation within their systems. The second bit is what's known as the Reputation Interchange. And you touched upon a really important point. Like, if I can't take it out of the community, it just increases my reliance on the community, right? Like, and I think this is why we see tech empires today, because everyone's on Facebook because everyone's on Facebook. Like, you can't leave. And that's a fantastic business strategy, but it's a really shitty thing to do for society today. And so the reputation interchange allows you to place at stake reputation from one community and port it into another. So let me frame it again, really, I think the most tangible ride sharing kind of way. Like, if you're a great driver in Uber and Grab says, hey, if you import your driving rating into Grab, you get fantastic benefits from day one. There's a catch here. Remember we said reputation can be staked, not spent. So that means if you drive poorly in Grab, it ripples back and affects your original Uber rating as well. So you've placed it at stake.
Right.
And that's really important, because now all of a sudden, if you're starting to drive well in Grab, it also reflects in Uber. It could also potentially, and the future that we're starting to see is, hey, we may not just have like 2 or 3 ride-sharing applications. Maybe you'll start seeing a really fragmented, distributed mosaic. Like, you'll have like the CBD in Singapore, Taxi Drivers Association. You'll see like maybe it's the Kallang Drivers Association, and each little group will be able to articulate their own reputation. And you'll be able to hop across them without being limited to one. And in the long run, there's 2 things that happen. One, you don't see this reliance on this one large, institution that defines reputation for everyone, because that's dystopian. Because dystopian is when Grab decides what a good driver I am, what I eat today, what I like, and we're seeing that already. Like, Grab does everything for us. And that's when we start entering dystopian territory. So I actually think what you're talking about is the future we see if we don't do anything about it. Like, we're headed there. We're already there, I would argue. Like, I was having a really interesting conversation with a few people last week, and an interesting point came up. Like, when, in our generation, when we grew up, we were part of multiple cultures.
Right.
And I'm not sure what it's like in Japan, but I'm sure there was like, multiple cultures and communities, and even if not, even if you probably had your Japanese culture and you had like Western culture, like at least you experienced 2 different or maybe 3 different cultures. Kids of today just experience Instagram culture.
Right.
Like, it's even more like monolithic. Like, it's even, everyone's just the same. Like, they've got the same dances, they've got the same, tags, same music, like the same, phrases.
Right.
And that's, like I say, like, that's dystopian. And so by creating the interchange, what we're saying is, you can actually take culture from one community and kind of reap the benefits of it across different communities. And that's only possible because reputation is non-zero sum. So activity in one circle can contextually ripple out into others. So, for example, it's allows you to say, hey, I'm behaving well in this one little community here. And because of people's placing at stake reputation, I can also reap the benefits of good behavior, like not being an idiot in an Uber, somewhere else. And that's now possible for you. So in a way, if you're actually a decent guy, like, it bodes really well for you. Like, you can actually, but at the same time, it's important that it's done in an agent-centric way. So where it ripples out, you're in control of. So you might choose to say, well, there is one 9 to 5 version of you, and there's one version, from 5 to 9. Like, you come home and you're active on social media, and you're driving conversations on Quora or Reddit or whatever. And maybe that's how you choose to build your life. Like, it's your choice. Someone like me probably, just goes 24 hours. I'm kind of like the same person. Maybe I have to actually, my wife tells me to start building boundaries. And so maybe I need to start doing that. But it allows you to be in control of it. And like I said, because it's distributed ledgers, like, if there's a random person in some corner of the world who says, wants to accuse Sid of misconduct, it's important who that person is. Like I said, there's no absolute, IMDb or Yelp server sitting in the sky. but people who will be affected by that rating will only be affected by it if they hold that person in high regard.
Right.
So it's relative, and it's important to build it out in that way.
Mm.
So to summarize, I think your concerns are where we're headed. Like that status quo.
Yeah.
We need to break it by creating an interchange which lets like diversity actually thrive.
Right.
Um,
And you mentioned before, outside of this podcast, but you talked about how you can monetize this reputation, right? So let's go in there. Like,
Yeah.
how do you capture value at a reputation? So for me, like what I can think of in my meager brain is that,
Yeah.
let's say I'm a good Airbnb host,
Yeah.
right? And it's not just about my property that
Yeah.
is gaining popularity.
Yeah.
Is that my service that
Yeah.
I put into it? I could take people around, show
Yeah,
around
yeah,
good
yeah.
spots that local people only know, and then maybe I could charge a little bit more for my property because
Yeah.
I give that
Yeah,
added
yeah,
service, right? That I can understand by like capturing value
Yeah.
with the reputation that I got. I mean, but maybe you think differently.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fantastic example of it. But I think there's several layers to it. So a lot of people ask me, like, are you trying to replace money? And that's not the point at all. What we're trying to say is, let's add a dimension to money. Like, why does money only have to have this one dimension of material capital? Like, let's add this other dimension of, reputation to it. And so one, if you're a great Airbnb host, maybe you can charge a premium. Maybe you can, get more visibility on Airbnb. And Airbnb is kind of playing with this with the concept of super hosts and a bunch of things. But now, as opposed to just an Airbnb doing it, like you'll start seeing little collectives around the world starting to do it. And so the aspiration here is to, with reputation as an economy, like what is it a representation of? Your potential, right? Like, and maybe Taka has 50 different layers to him. Like maybe he is punctual, maybe he's an interesting thinker, maybe he's hygienic, maybe he's a good Airbnb host, maybe he loves coffee, maybe he loves travel, like all of these different layers to you. Some of them may not be monetizable.
Yeah.
Like maybe being punctual, maybe being hygienic is not monetizable in every context.
Right.
But maybe if you were to take up a job as a chef, you could monetize it.
Sure.
So again, that agency lies with you. Like you can choose,
Right.
but there's definitely merit in you being able to hold that potential just for what it is.
Okay.
And so of course there's cases where you could go into an Airbnb where you start to monetize it. Or as an Uber driver, if you're a great driver, maybe you have access to credit because, there's more likelihood of income. If you're on social media, like if you have a higher reputation, you'll instantly have greater audiences because, wow, so many people hold you, and so
Yeah.
currently in social media, to get an audience, you just have to keep saying things all the time.
Yes.
So as opposed to that, if you are 5-star rated, you can kind of have the security say, I'm just going to put quality content out there. And that itself is just revolutionary for social media, right? Like you're not operating out of this fear of I'm going to lose my audience all the time. With speaking with incubation networks, which are starting to say, with this current blockchain crypto paradigm, like any entrepreneur is just going out there printing a bunch of tokens and there's no, repercussions, like not even legal repercussions in most cases. And so what if we create a system where, you can print tokens by placing reputation at stake?
Right.
And so it starts to create these very interesting models where, wow, he's a fantastic entrepreneur. Like he's placing reputation at stake.
Yeah.
This is so there was an interesting economic model in India, actually. Like if you traveled from Mumbai to Calcutta, which is literally west to east across the whole country, and this is way back, like, decades ago, you didn't actually have to carry currency with you. You could ask, show up in Calcutta, and a community member in Mumbai would call a community member in Calcutta and say, I know this person, like lend them money, let them spend it.
Right.
And then kind of settle when you go back to Mumbai.
Okay.
So those are the kinds of interactions that are possible when you have that trust fabric in place.
Sure.
Like
Yeah,
as
yeah.
opposed to like, me carrying those, those coins all the way from Mumbai to Calcutta. And so that's one whole perspective. Like as opposed to you, when I ask you about your security, you're going to be like, I need at least these many $1 million to be secure, right? Like now you can start to say, oh, I've got, 50 kinds of reputation. And these reputations allow me to print token when I want to. And that's kind of cool because you're not, each one of us is not trying to, accumulate billions of dollars just to, to have an impact in society or to sustain ourselves. And at a larger level, that's really healthy because I think if we keep generating more and more material capital, there's not going to be any planet left. And so we can actually start to hold security in this way.
Let's go back to that. Print tokens based on your reputation. So,
Yeah, we're actually having these conversations right now.
Okay.
So if you're an entrepreneur, like place reputation at stake.
Yeah.
And maybe it's like a community of entrepreneurs. Like for everything to begin, you need some kind of community, right? So maybe it's your track record, maybe it's your insights on entrepreneurship, maybe it's know whatever the community decides. And then you might be like, I'm Taka, I have a 3-star reputation. I'd like to take up this venture.
Yeah.
And you place that reputation at stake. And so if that venture takes off, like you may bump up from a 3-star to 4-star. And if it crashes, maybe it's a 3-star to 2-star. But it's interesting because your game isn't, I just need to raise as much money as possible right now, man. Like, I don't care. Like, then you start thinking about, wow, I've got something at stake.
Right.
And so it also gives you comfort because maybe that entrepreneurship community says, you know what, if you're 3-star, you can print 100,000 tokens at any point of time. Like, no questions asked. And so you're starting to see models like that emerge.
Oh, so you're saying that it's going to affect your capital raising?
It's going to affect your capital raising. I think it can potentially even change the concept of fundraising. Like, it'll become fund printing.
Printing?
I don't know. We need to come up with a word for that.
I want to get...
yeah. So, for example, we have a community of entrepreneurs. Like, everyone's got some kind of reputation in it. And if you're 5-star, you have a credit limit. You have a limit to print this community's currency up to 100,000.
Okay.
So it's kind of cool because you're vested in the community. So you're not going to be like, I'm just going to print 100,000 tokens and go vacation with it.
Yeah.
Like, I'm putting it at stake, so I better do something about it. But it's interesting because you can now print this token and this token has some kind of monetary value and go start a bunch of ventures. But there's value to it. Like, you're not, printing it out of thin air.
So those tokens need to be used within that community, right? Basically.
Not within the community. It could be to start a venture, right? And and maybe that token is freely traded within that community. Like, maybe it's $1 each. And so there's just a distributed pool of liquidity for it. And whoever wants to back the entrepreneur token buys it or sells it or whatever. But people of the community has the freedom to print autonomously.
Right.
And so, you're not putting up a fundraise and you have that freedom. It's kind of like an overdraft with a bank.
Right.
Like, you don't need to, if you have those limits, you can just extend those limits. So in a way, what it's doing is allowing us to breathe a little bit. And that's what trust kind of does, right? Like, if we're really good friends, you can take more risks with our friendship. Like, you could maybe make a slightly racist joke, or maybe be a little late, because we're really good friends. But if we're not on good terms, you're gonna be like, I can't be late with Sid, man. Like, he's never gonna talk to me. And so that's what we're talking about. Like, by creating that trust, like, it starts popping these new interactions. Like, I'd love to loop you into some of these conversations that we're having. So this was an example of equity backed by reputation. We're speaking to someone in the Philippines who's trying to create a low-cost housing project where they're issuing debt for low-cost housing backed by reputation. So there's a community that lives in a slum, is about to move into a new low-cost housing project. And in the past, slum dwellers, and someone who's been part of some of these cities where slums exist, a lot of these people don't have assets to get loans. Like, they don't even have formal income to get loans. And so as a result, they're never going to move out of the slums. So these guys have started this project where dwellers will be issued loans backed by reputation, because that's all they have. So within that community, if you default on payments, you actually lose reputation. And so we're trying to figure out what is good. Again, it shouldn't be a reputation like only good people and bad people. Like, that person who defaults shouldn't be excluded from all social,
maybe it could be a bad person but pays back on time, right?
So it should be linked in some way to your economic status. So if you're a vegetable vendor and these are your foreseen cash flows, like, so that's the conversation that we're having.
So that's like a crowdfunding thing.
It's crowdfunding, but I would say it's debt backed by reputation.
Okay.
And again, in a way, it's taking principles of microfinance, because
Yeah.
microfinance is fundamentally just social fabric and giving it scale. And I think distributed ledgers allow us to scale, because now that, if you don't pay back that low-cost housing loan, it's not limited to that community. It could ripple into peer-to-peer lending communities that you're part of. It could ripple into like future communities that you're part of. And that's why the interchange is important, because that community isn't the only one that owns this information. There's another application that is speaking about, someone wants to start meal sharing at homes. So if you think about it, like it's a pretty fantastic concept, right? Like you should be able to open up your app and show up at a neighbor's home for a meal.
Yeah.
And so there's different
Some random guy comes over to your house and have a meal.
Yeah, so that's why it doesn't happen right now, right?
Yeah.
Like there's just random people about.
Yeah.
And what if like this really weird person comes in and like in my house,
Yeah.
and that's the problem. Like the current internet just does not enable intimate interactions. But with a reputation-based economy, it can start to enable this, because that if 5 of your friends think that Taka's a fantastic person or a great guest, he's okay. Because in the future I'm going to start looking at I'll question these 5 friends if Taka turns out to be an idiot.
Right.
And so what this starts enabling is these kinds of interactions which right now just do not happen.
Right.
Like, so the real game, or I would say the real boost to the economy or the material world, is like, I think it could lead to a massive leapfrogging or an unlocking of value, which now just does not happen, because the only fabric for trust we have is like government, banks, airline companies, and that's so monolithic and so elite. It doesn't percolate down to a lot of like other things that we might do.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I guess like there's a review for everything these days, and the only thing that we don't really have is a review about us, right? And
For good reason.
yeah.
I think it's not healthy to have us reviewed all the time everywhere,
Of course.
because if it's just sitting on like IMDb,
of
servers,
course.
like
Of course.
we don't want that.
But we want to know the person a little bit better.
Yeah.
So if I'm coming from even in a case of like a business, right? So I spent some time in Panama and Colombia, and nobody really knows me over there.
Yeah.
So I go there. I would like to have them know me a little bit before I come, right? And then the conversation will flow a little bit better. Then when I'm standing on stage, people have some background on who I am, what kind of person I am. Nowadays, it's like you could look at LinkedIn and you can know the person. On a paper basis, meaning like a CV basis, but you can't really know the person on a contextual basis, right? So getting to know people better by historical actions that you have, and you're backed by it, and
Through trust networks.
yes, then and it will allow people to like trust you a little bit more, distrust you in certain ways, but at least they get to know you rather than having somebody completely blank show up in front of you, right?
Yeah. I like to frame that as context. So the more context you can bring into interactions, the more value you can potentially unlock, which is vastly different from the blockchain premise, which was zero context.
Yeah.
Like, let's engage in a smart contract without ever knowing each other and without ever having to see each other. So it's a huge flip, in fact. And so I think, which is why our conversation attracts people who are interested in, I actually would love to bring a lot of context into interactions. And the sad bit is we've never had this formal economic language for context. So when you showed up in Panama or Colombia, you had to call a bunch of people and be like, hey, can you like place your reputation at stake and introduce me? Not in those words, but that's kind of what you did, which is so old school, man. Like that's like 500 years ago. It's like the equivalent of barter. So the last 500 years, we've developed the formal economic language for money. Like you showed up in Colombia and Panama and swiped your card, and your money ported through magical networks, and you were taken care of materially.
Sure.
But socially, like it would be really cool if your reputation could port in similar ways.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's the aspiration here. Like, how do we develop that formal economic language for context? And that has, I think, fascinating possibilities for all kinds of interactions. Like I think in existing interactions, it'll start creating more dimensions of value. I think it'll start unlocking interactions that we just don't do today. Like we just don't think about it. And I think that's what the aspiration is. It's a huge leap. I agree. But I think the aspiration over the next few months is to start showcasing a pilot working at scale, showcasing applications. Like, what's the motivation here for people? We ask ourselves that, right? Like, I think in this regard, we think of people as pretty, like, most people won't move because it's good for you. Like, we were talking about this before, like, it's been 25 years of Captain Planet cartoons and recycling material and information and the Amazon's still burning. Like, there's just like it feels like a massive failure on our parts. Like, we've known this for 25 years or 30 years or whatever. And so I think by just telling people, oh, own your own data, be agents, and like, people don't move. Like, I think that's a safe assumption to make.
No, everybody keeps using Facebook. I mean, nobody really gives a shit.
Yeah. I think what is a sustainable motivation in the long run is just whole new applications that allow us to interact in a new way, allows us to see like tremendous benefits and value accrue to us. And that value could be material, like maybe you start making more money as someone who's hosting meals at your home. Maybe it is as a guest. Wow, I would so much, I'd much rather go into people's homes and eat rather than like eat at, maybe the Hawkers or the McDonald's every night. And so that's actually in central India and in, another application that we're talking to that are building these use cases. So I think when people start seeing, oh, wow, I'm using this social network, but I can swap out the UI. Like, I can choose what the colors in the UI is. I can use one common window for all my social networks. Like, I don't have to go to Facebook for one and Instagram for another and Telegram for another. Like, these hyper collaborative, super agent centric, like I can bring my context into these applications. That is kind of the hook. Like an example of a blogging platform. Like today I might sign up on Medium and Medium is going to be like, so Sid, like tell us what you really like and we're going to curate an experience for you. And that's nice, but it's also kind of shitty because it's like Medium's algorithm deciding what it kind of likes for me.
Sure.
But as opposed to that, I could log on to a blogging platform in an agent-centric world and instantly my contexts get imported in here. And so that means the food bloggers that I'm really interested in, the coffee bloggers that I'm really interested in, the travel bloggers that I'm really interested in, like I start seeing them in this new blogging platform. And so my context continues with me no matter where I go. And that's again how reality works. Like if you're introduced to a new friend circle, one of your friends is like placing their credibility on you and you import your context.
Sure.
You don't show up in the new friend circle and they're going to be like, so let us curate this experience for you. But it's like that with Facebook, right? Like you sign up and Facebook is like, let us tell you what we think you'd like. As
These
opposed
are the
to
people you should connect with.
Which is why the only friends you'll make on Facebook aren't really, friends. It's just acquaintances. Same with LinkedIn. So the big flip, I think, in agent-centric worlds is you'll be able to carry your context wherever you go. And I think that's super cool. Like, I think once people get a taste of that, like that's, I think, a hit that most people, would really wholesomely enjoy. And I think that answers this question of, well, where is blockchain distributed ledgers really going to hit society? Because everyone's asking, like, after all of this hype, is it all about just KYC and crypto wallets? Like, what's the promise here, guys?
Or just ultimately just Bitcoin, right?
If
That's
you
what
think
it's
about
starting
like that,
to look like. I mean, is it just money? Money is the only application that we've seen that it's sort of succeeding in some way. But
and there's some who will argue, no, it's about like owning your data. But if it's basically a Facebook, but I own my data, I don't think people move. Like, I don't think I kind of care about that. But if it's like these whole new breed of applications, which, like I said, are hyper collaborative, like let me breathe and let me do a bunch of cool things because they're not like invasive and toxic and not trying to like silo themselves. I think that's going to be a super cool hook. And I think that's when we'll start seeing, and you know what's interesting? Like I think people will start using these apps. To them, it'll just be web apps or whatever. I don't think anyone will care that it's blockchain or distributed ledgers.
They shouldn't care either.
And I think that's the best. That's kind of the way things should be. Like, I think it's with the internet in the late 90s, there was this, let's get on to the internet and let's put our business on the internet. And there was this hype, But I think the real adoption was probably 2002 or 3, when it was just like just being online all the time. Like that was the hook. And no one really cares about how the internet works. And I think in the same way, like I don't think it shouldn't be like a blockchain app or a blockchain economy.
Yeah, I'm
like,
just sick
I
of
mean,
hearing that stuff,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, it's more about the business model than anything else.
So I think we're seeing that transition. Like some of the platforms like Holochain are now just describing themselves as distributed web apps,
Right.
or Web 3.0.
Right.
And I think the hook is collaborative.
And then how's Sacred Capital going to monetize your business based on this reputation economy or reputational
So there's two
capital?
bits. The Reputation Labs is more like a design think tank, like come here, plug into this and we'll help you design this. We're trying to design that out as a social network. So we're creating something called New Economy Analysts, like people who are into quant kind of using this to design new kinds of economic systems. And the Reputation Interchange is more the business of it. So its business model is the exchange. It's kind of like an exchange. Like when you go on an exchange, you pay a commission. And so every app that's kind of porting reputation from one to another, we charge them for the computation power that they draw down.
I see. Okay.
And so that's just plain nuts and bolts business model. And so we pay underlying, computational fees to Holochain or whichever agent-centric platform that delivers power for us, and then we charge the apps and invoice them. So it's, in that sense, a very traditional business model. But all of this is possible because, again, distributed ledgers allow micro accounting. Like we can charge an app cents.
Yeah,
You try doing that on the Visa network and you pay $3 for a 1 cent invoice, right? So it's just ridiculous. Which is why these micro transactions, micro accounting is possible, and so that's the business model of things for Sacred Capital.
I see. And then how did you derive this idea? I mean, reputational capital or economy. Like I've Googled it, before, and I could see documents from like 1995 talking about reputational capital. So I mean, I'm sure it goes back a bit more than that, pre-internet times. But and how did you, in your kind of daily life or whatever event that you had in your life, come to this conclusion that the world should go towards reputational economy?
I think for starters, it's been a collective effort. So there's been about 30, 35 people who've contributed to this. And over the last 18 months, we've been on the road, spoken about 7,000 or 8,000 people, just pushing this out. And which is why some of the questions you have today, like it's come through examples and through points that people have raised. It kind of goes back, like I said, in the 30s and 40s, this whole conversation, 1930s and 40s, this conversation around social fabric, local economies, which was then taken to the West through this guy called E.F. Schumacher. And a lot of stuff written about social fabric and reputation-based economies and the value that they also unlock. But for me, I remember back in 2014, I had this really interesting conversation with one of the founders of Holochain, his name is Eric Harris Brown. And at that point of time, I was, I'd been a banker trader for the longest time, for about 7 years. And then I'd spent about 4 years off the grid in this community, experimenting with money and distributed economics. And there's a bunch of stuff online. You can check that out, where I was like talking about different kind of economic systems. And I was, had the opportunity to explore some of these systems. And that's when I came across distributed ledgers, and I was like, whoa, like this, like now that we can articulate culture onto a distributed ledger, like we don't have to depend on those patriarchal systems that just, that control people. And so at that point, I had this really interesting conversation with Eric Harris Brown, one of the founders of Holochain, and he said, you know what I think, Sid? It's not going to be so much about making money more efficient, but it's going to broaden our experience of wealth. Like we'll now start thinking about wealth, not just as coins and money, but even social capital, cultural capital, informational capital. And so that kind of hooked me. And so I was like, wealth in the future is going to expand. Like we're going to engage it in a radically new way. And so that's kind of the hook. Like if the world's going more peer-to-peer, we need social fabric, reputation systems to kind of balance it out.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've seen a business model before that, people were crowdfunding collateral for people to like, borrow money. And I was like, who the fuck is going to do that if you don't know the person? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, but then, what you're saying with the reputation kind of, that could probably work if it starts,
We've actually been thinking about it. So one, when we start around December and Jan is when we're going to start, thinking about activating our network, etc. And so there will be a fundraise associated with it. But we're also thinking about doing a fundraise with social capital. So having people stake their reputation on us. So it's kind of like a social capital raise as well. So there's going to be a money raise as well as a social capital raise. So that's like a model we're thinking about. Might be like the world's first social capital raise.
Does that include fiat money, or is it like,
so there's one layer which is money, and so you can contribute money, and that's purely a monetary conversation, like you get more money if this as this takes off. But then there's like, hey, do you want to stake your reputation and talk about it to your friends? And so we're creating this concept of advocates, like people who will be like, I've thought about this, I've chatted with these guys, and that's legit. Because honestly, like I think there's so many blockchain projects out there. The real currency now is social capital. Like if I think you're a great guy and you think this is a good project, then I'm gonna go and look through this, right? Because you think about the tons of projects. Like I can't go through these white papers anymore.
Man. 16, 17, there was so much of this garbage going around, and I used to go to all these ICO events and blockchain conferences and hear all this interesting stuff, but like majority of it was crap, right? And I just didn't want to hang out with these people. I mean, I'm from a traditional finance world too, right? So when we go to like these hedge fund conferences, I mean, we're talking about like real investments and proper educated people and all that. I'm not saying that blockchain people are not educated; they're very educated, but this is a mix of like various people, right? And then I've never met all these various people, and I was like sick of it. I'm like, fuck this, I can't go to these things anymore, right? But now, yes, as you say, like because this world is just like chaotic, right? And although it's like kind of shedding the chaoticness to it, but there's a lot more that I want to know about people. Maybe it's more like VC thing too, but like I want to know more about the person before I even take the next step, right? Take the next call, take the meeting, read the white paper, whatever it is.
Yeah, I hear you, and I think it's kind of like a deconditioning that we've all had to go through, because 2016, 2017, all of us just came from these finance backgrounds, or maybe some people from traditional tech backgrounds, and just like, boop, let's just apply that same model in this new environment. And it's kind of like when you move from planet Earth to space, like all of these assumptions start breaking down, like things are more relative, and I think the last 18 months in particular for us, like we've been able to, wow, that just does not hold true anymore in the distributed environment. Like letting go of a lot of conditioning was super key to coming up with this. And I think that's also very counterintuitive, because as letting go is not something we're used to. So we're kind of trained to go the other way, right? But yeah, the next few months are going to be super critical for us. Like I said, we're going to do a fundraise. We're going to start, bringing on board advocates who want to vouch for us, because I think that currency of people vouching for you is super key, and we want to bring on board people who understand this, who've asked and poked holes at us, who understand the criticality of this. Like why is this a mission for me personally? I think we all agree that the world is kind of in a mess, and I think it's because, like I said, regulations just don't stand true in this hyper distributed world. And if we are to create a stable environment in which value can be created, in which people see merit in collaborating in non-zero-sum ways, like we have to create this new way. And so with everything new, it takes a time. It's time, but creating the pilot, showing how it works at scale, and then kind of gradually rippling it out and growing it, like that's what's in it for me. So in that sense, my kick is over the next 10 years, 15 years, can we create this new economic paradigm? And so it's been, I've always, been in finance and looked at this from a lens of wealth and money and what does money of the future look like. And that's kind of my hook, is creating an economic system that large masses of people can benefit from.
Right. Well, I mean, the money is not going around to everybody, right? And it's going to be probably less and less of that going around because, obviously money is being concentrated. Jobs are going to be shed. I mean, maybe new jobs might come up, but it has to be not productivity based. I mean, we talked about this before, but
maybe potential based.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it has to be, a way that you can earn money or like kind of have some capital that it's not based on I'm going to get it from a job. There could be some like social activity that you can do that you can actually, have wealth in a different sense of like not like a job kind of thing. Make this world, transition this world into something that's not about, human beings going and it's all about productivity, right?
Yeah.
And making money off of that.
There's someone interesting in one of our interactions came up with this, like, the old economy was based on stuff, like it's based on material capital, right? Like it's centered on stuff. And so, of course, we're just going to think about, well, how much stuff can this money generate? And so if a robot can create that stuff more efficiently than you, then what's the use for you, right? And so it was really crudely put, but I thought it was so elegant. And he was like, well, what I'm seeing here is this is an economy for human potential. And so if we want to maximize human potential, there'll never be this question of, are you irrelevant? Because the question is that if you maximize your potential, like it's centered around you, it's centered around humans. And so I think there's definitely a strain of what we're doing. Like we didn't intend it to go this way, but there's been a few people picking it up from the perspective of relevance of humans in the future. Like how do we build human potential? There's a question, this whole conversation around the future of work. Like if the future is going to be gig economy, like we need an underlying social fabric for it as well. So that's I think there's different perspectives with which you can look at what we're doing. And we're kind of using those different perspectives with different stakeholders, like some governments are, like we were having a conversation in New Zealand, and New Zealand has this massive gig economy vibe going.
Yeah, I heard about that.
And
it's not. Maybe I'm wrong, but maybe there's not that many international institutions.
Yeah, I think it's physically so remote that most people prefer to move there and work as devs or designers. And the challenge with the gig economy today is it's just not as reliable as a job, right? And so, in a future of work conversation, what came up was, well, fine, if I'm in the gig economy and if I lose, maybe 30% of my income for whatever reason. But if I'm plugged in, with some kind of e-learning program and earning micro credentials, like maybe insurance kicks in, like, and so you can start to have job insurance or gig insurance when there is social fabric.
Right.
Like, there's reputation that can be placed at stake.
It's probably better than just like these kind of concepts of like basic income or universal basic income. It's like kind of like throwing money at, at people. But it shouldn't be that way, right? I mean,
I think those are like the worst case scenarios. Like I think that's basically just throwing money to keep people from like revolting. Which is I think that's a whole other conversation, but there's so much more that we can do. I think that's what I'd like to say about those models. But I think for that we have to kind of regenerate the social fabric and let it weave through people's lives. And I think definitely in developed economies, that's how some of this kicks in. In less, I would say, non-industrialized economies, like you said, it's a leapfrog effect that has to play out. Like there's so many masses of people that are just unbanked, but rich in social fabric. Like, 21-year-old kid in small town India doesn't have access to a bank loan, but he probably has 50 friends in his community who really think he's a great guy. And so that person can now, leverage his social fabric and unlock value in some way. So I think in developed economies, it's more, transition to the gig economy and future of work. In more industrialized economies, it's like, oh, let's start building micro apps, micro entrepreneurs. That's what I think.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks.
Jaka,
Thanks for your time.
thanks for
man.
listening.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we're doing on time, but this definitely
was
felt like a
great.
great
Yeah.
conversation.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
Thanks.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Future Design Podcast.